Elias grabbed his flashlight. His hands were trembling. He opened the attic door. The air was stagnant. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the small attic window. He climbed the pull-down stairs. The attic was a cramped space, filled with old boxes, forgotten furniture, cobwebs. He swept his flashlight beam across the floor. Nothing. He moved slowly, methodically, checking behind boxes under tarpaulins. The scratching stopped. He stood still, listening. The silence was absolute. Then he saw it. On the far wall, high up, near the roofline, a series of faint, almost erased marks, like tally marks, hundreds of them, scratched into the old wooden beam, and beside them a single faded word, scrawled in what looked like dried mud. Wait. Elias stared at the word. His mind reeled. Wait. Wait for what? He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The air in the attic grew intensely cold. The temperature plummeted, making his breath mist. He heard a faint whisper then, directly behind him. A child's voice, mournful, desperate. You left us. Elias spun around. His flashlight beam darted wildly. Nothing. Just the empty attic. The old boxes. But the whisper. It was too clear. Too close. He felt a cold touch on his leg. A small hand. Icy cold. He looked down. Nothing. He scrambled down the attic stairs, his heart pounding. He slammed the attic door shut, leaned against it, gasping for breath. He looked around his bedroom. The walls seemed to press in on him. The silence was suffocating. He knew then. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't his imagination. Something was here. Something that the flood had brought. Or awakened. He remembered the old stories. The town's history. Before the dam. Before the creek was tamed. This area had been a small settlement. A few houses. A church. A graveyard. All submerged when the dam was built. Flooded. Forgotten. Until now. The water had risen. And with it, something else had risen. From the depths. From the forgotten graves. The scratching. The cold. The whispers. They were the voices of the drowned. The forgotten. Waiting. Elias sat on his bed. Clutched his flashlight. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't leave. The water was too high. He was trapped. With them. The silent, unseen inhabitants of the flood. He heard the scratching again. From the attic. Louder now. More insistent. And the faint, mournful whisper. You left us. He looked at the attic door. The wood seemed to bulge slightly. The sound of scratching intensified. He closed his eyes. He saw faces in the darkness. Distorted. Waterlogged. Their eyes empty. Their mouths open in silent screams. He opened his eyes. The scratching stopped. The house was silent. But the silence was worse. It was a watchful silence. A waiting silence. He knew they were there. All around him. In the water. In the walls. In the attic. Waiting. The sun set. Plunging the house into darkness once more. Elias didn't light any candles. He just sat. In the dark. Listening. To the subtle sounds of the water swirling around his house. To the creak of the old wood. And to the faint, almost imperceptible whispers that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the flood. The rising tide had brought more than just water. It had brought the past. And the past was not ready to be forgotten. Elias was no longer alone in his house. He was trapped with the drowned. And their silent, chilling demands. The rain had been relentless for 3 days. A biblical downpour that turned the usually placid Willow Creek into a churning, muddy monster. Elias Thorne, a man whose life had been defined by the quiet predictability of his small riverside town, watched the water creep steadily up his lawn. His house, a modest 2-story built on a slight rise, had always been safe. Until now. The local news, a flickering beacon of anxiety on his old television, issued increasingly dire warnings. Flash flood watches upgraded to warnings. Evacuation orders for low-lying areas. Elias, a stubborn man of 70, had dismissed them. He'd seen floods before. Nothing like this. By midnight, the water had reached his porch. The familiar sounds of the night, crickets, distant traffic, were drowned out by the ceaseless drumming of rain on the roof and the menacing roar of the swollen creek. The power flickered, then died, plunging his house into an oppressive darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the rain-lashed landscape. He lit a few candles. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making his familiar living room feel alien. He walked through the house, checking the doors, the windows. The water was seeping in now. a thin, cold line creeping under the back door. He grabbed a few sandbags he'd optimistically placed hours ago, but they were useless against the rising tide. The air grew heavy, stagnant. It smelled of wet earth, old wood, and something else. Something cold and metallic, like rust, or old blood. He dismissed it as the smell of the floodwaters, stirring up the sediment of the creek bed. He retreated upstairs. His bedroom, a sanctuary of warmth and familiarity, now felt like a precarious perch. He sat by the window watching the dark, swirling water below. It was higher now, much higher. The street lights, usually a comforting glow, were submerged, their faint light distorted by the murky depths. Trees stood like drowned sentinels, their lower branches swallowed by the flood. Then he heard it, a faint scratching, coming from downstairs. He strained his ears. The sound came again, rhythmic, persistent, like something dragging itself across the floor. He told himself it was debris floating in, or the house settling under the pressure of the water. He grabbed his old hunting flashlight. Its beam, a weak yellow cone, cut through the oppressive darkness. He descended the stairs slowly, each step a creak in the silence. The water was ankle-deep on the first floor now. Cold, murky. It swirled around his feet, carrying unseen debris. The scratching sound was louder here. It seemed to come from the living room. He moved cautiously, his flashlight sweeping the room. The furniture was partially submerged. The rug, a sodden mass, floated unevenly. He saw nothing, just the water, the shadows. He heard a soft splash then, from the kitchen. He spun around, his flashlight beam darting. Nothing. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the echo of his own voice answered. He felt a sudden, intense cold. Not the cold of the floodwater, but a localized chill that enveloped him, making the hairs on his arms prickle. It was strongest near the back door where the water had first seeped in. He shone his light there. Nothing. Just the dark water. The closed door. He retreated back upstairs, his heart pounding. He told himself it was the stress, the isolation, the old house making noises. But the scratching, the splash, the cold, they felt too real. He tried to sleep. But every creak of the house, every ripple of the water outside, seemed to amplify the sounds he had heard. He kept seeing shadows in his peripheral vision. Fleeting movements. A dark shape disappearing around a corner. He told himself it was his imagination. The lack of sleep. The water continued to rise. By morning it was halfway up the first floor windows. His house was an island in a vast brown lake. The rain had finally stopped. The sky was a bruised gray. The silence was unnerving. The roar of the creek had subsided to a low, gurgling current. He looked out the window. His neighbor's house, usually visible, was almost entirely submerged. Only its roof peaked above the water. A chilling sight. He heard it again. The scratching. This time it was from the attic, directly above his bedroom. He looked up at the ceiling. The sound was faint, but distinct, like something trying to claw its way through the floorboards. She turned on her flashlight, cutting through the darkness. Empty rooms. Submerged medical equipment. She heard the baby crying again. Closer. From the children's ward. She walked through the water. His step felt heavy. The water was cold, and felt thick, like mud. She reached the children's ward. Overturned cribs. Floating toys. And the baby crying. Now very clear. From inside one of the overturned cribs. She approached. Aimed her flashlight. Nothing. The crib was empty. But the crying. It continued. From inside the crib. She reached into the water. Felt around. A small hand. Cold. So cold. She pulled it out. It was a doll. A baby doll. Its face broken. Its eyes missing. The doll was soaking wet. And intensely cold. The baby crying stopped. Suddenly. Silence returned. Heavy. Oppressive. Sarah dropped the doll. She backed away. Stumbling. She looked around. Shadows. Moving in the corners. Whispers. From all directions. She knew. This was not just a doll. This was something else. Something trapped here. By the water. She turned. Ran. Through the water. Towards the window. She climbed out. Jumped into her boat. Paddled as fast as she could. Away from the hospital. Away from Havenwood. She never looked back. She never returned. She never published her photos. She never spoke of what she saw. What she heard. But sometimes. At night. When the rain fell. She would hear sounds. Whispers. a baby crying. And she would feel a piercing cold. A cold that came from the water. A cold that came from submerged Havenwood. The town that had risen from its grave, bringing its forgotten inhabitants with it. They waited, under the water, waiting for someone to join them. And Sarah knew. She had almost been one of them. The water rose fast. Not like a normal flood. This was more like a lake appearing overnight. Sarah, a freelance photographer assigned to document the flood's impact, drove slowly on what used to be the main road of the small town of Havenwood. Now only rooftops showed. Murky brown water stretched as far as she could see. Havenwood was an old town, situated in a river valley, known for its history and its old stories. Before the big dam was built, there was an older village beneath it, submerged, forgotten. Now the dam had broken, and the past was rising. Sarah parked her car on higher ground. The water reached her tires. She put on her knee-high boots, grabbed her camera, and started walking. The air was damp, cold, and there was a strange smell. The smell of mud, rotting plants, and something else. Something fishy, like dead fish, but deeper, older. She launched her small inflatable boat, gliding over what used to be streets, past almost submerged road signs, drowned trees, silent houses, everything covered in a thin layer of silt, like a shroud. She looked for signs of life, or any signs. Rescue teams had left. They only evacuated the living. The others, they assumed. She paddled towards the town center, towards what used to be the town square, now just a wide expanse of water. She saw the old church. Its bell tower still stood tall, but its lower half was submerged. The windows were dark, like empty eyes. She heard a sound, faint, like a moan, from the direction of the church. She stopped paddling. Listen. The sound came again, clear, like someone was struggling, under the water. Sarah paddled closer. Her heart pounded. Maybe someone was alive, trapped. She called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only silence answered, except for the moan, now more like a whisper. From within the water, she saw something, floating near the submerged church door. A doll. An old rag doll. Its face faded. Its eyes black buttons. The doll floated face up. Its eyes stared at her. She paddled closer to the doll. The doll seemed to move, slightly, as if pushed by a current. But there was no strong current there. The water was still. The doll turned slowly. Its eyes kept staring at her. She felt a piercing cold. Not the cold of the water, but a cold that came from the doll. A cold that seeped through her glove. A cold that made her skin crawl. She took her camera, took some pictures of the doll. She tried not to touch it. It felt wrong. The doll seemed too aware. She kept paddling, away from the church. But she kept hearing sounds. More sounds now. Whispers, murmurs, from under the water. Like many people talking. Beneath the surface, she saw shadows, moving under the water. Faint shapes, like people, moving slowly, between the sunken houses. She aimed her camera, tried to capture them. But the shadows were too fast, too faint. She started to feel uneasy. This was not just a flood. This was something else. Something that had risen from the water. She paddled towards the old hospital, a large building, located on lower ground, now almost entirely submerged. Only its roof showed, and its chimney. She heard a sound again, this time clearer, like a cough, and then, the sound of a baby crying. From inside the hospital, Sarah froze. A baby crying. In a place like this. Impossible. She knew rescue teams had evacuated everyone. She paddled slowly towards the hospital, her heart pounding. She found a broken window on the roof, big enough to enter. She tied her boat, climbed inside. The hospital interior was dark. Water reached her waist. The smell of fish, the smell of old medicine, and another smell, a deeply rotten smell. He knelt, pushed aside some debris. He reached out, touched the wood. It was icy cold. He pulled his hand back. A shiver ran down his spine. He shone his light inside the chest. It was filled with old dolls. Porcelain dolls. Rag dolls. Their faces were caked in mud. Their clothes rotted. Their eyes, dark and empty, seemed to stare up at him. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of unease. He closed the lid of the chest. He didn't want to look at them. He didn't want to touch them. He continued his search, avoiding the chest. But the sound started again. The thud. The dragging. Now closer. And then a faint whisper. From behind him. A child's voice. Indistinct. But chilling. "Don't leave us." Daniel froze. He spun around. His flashlight beam darted wildly. Nothing. Just the dark, muddy basement. He was alone. But the whisper. It was too clear. Too close. He felt a cold touch on his back. A small hand. Icy cold. He recoiled. Stumbling backwards. He scrambled through the mud. Towards the stairs. He had to get out. He had to leave. This was not just a house. This was something else. He reached the stairs. Climbed quickly. His breath ragged. He burst through the basement door. Slammed it shut behind him. Leaned against it, gasping for breath. He looked around the mud-filled kitchen. He was safe. For now. He didn't finish the recovery. He left the house. He didn't report what he saw. What he heard. He just drove away. From Maple Street. From Riverbend. He never returned to that house. He never spoke of the basement. Or the dolls. Or the whispers. He tried to forget. To rationalize. But the memories clung to him. Like the mud. Like the cold. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, he would feel a sudden, inexplicable chill. He'd find himself staring into the darkness. Convinced he could see the empty eyes of mud-caked dolls. And in the deepest silence, he would swear he could hear faint whispers. A child's voice. "Don't leave us." The flood had brought more than just destruction. It had brought a secret. A chilling secret. From the depths of the earth. From the forgotten past. The dolls in the basement. They were not just toys. They were silent witnesses. Trapped. Waiting. And the flood had given them a voice. A voice that would haunt Daniel long after the waters receded. The basement's secret was out. And it was hungry for company. The call came from the fire chief. Not an emergency. A recovery. The floodwaters had receded enough. They needed a team. To check the houses. To retrieve anything valuable. Or any remains. Daniel, a seasoned volunteer firefighter, took the assignment. He needed the extra hours. His town, Riverbend, was a mess. Houses ripped from foundations. Cars overturned. Trees uprooted. The river, usually a gentle curve, had turned into a destructive force. Now it was just a muddy trickle, leaving behind a landscape of devastation. Daniel drove his pickup truck through the debris-strewn streets. The air smelled of mud, stagnant water, and something metallic, like rust, or something worse. He pulled up to 14 Maple Street, a small, unassuming house. Its first floor coated in a thick layer of mud. Its windows shattered. He grabbed his flashlight, his crowbar, his respirator. The house was silent. A chilling silence. He pushed open the front door. It groaned, resisting. The interior was dark. Mud covered everything. Furniture was overturned. Personal items scattered. He moved slowly, systematically, checking each room. The living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms. Everything was ruined, coated in mud, waterlogged. The smell was oppressive. A mix of damp earth, mildew, and that metallic tang. Stronger here. He reached the kitchen. The floor was slick with mud. He saw the basement door, slightly ajar. A sliver of absolute darkness visible within. He felt a sudden, inexplicable dread. The basement. Always the worst part. He pushed the door open fully. The air that wafted up was cold, stagnant, and the metallic smell was overwhelming here. He shone his flashlight down the narrow wooden stairs. They were covered in mud, slippery. The water line was visible on the wall, almost to the ceiling. The basement had been completely submerged. He descended cautiously, each step a creak, a protest. His boots sank into the thick mud at the bottom. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a chaotic scene. Shelves overturned. Boxes ripped open. Everything was a sodden, muddy mess. He started his search, moving through the debris, looking for anything salvageable. He found old photo albums, ruined. A child's bicycle, twisted metal. A box of old tools, rusted solid. As he worked, he heard sounds, faint, from the far corner. A soft thud, then a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. He stopped, listened. The sound ceased. He told himself it was the house settling, the water receding, the debris shifting. He moved towards the corner, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He saw a large wooden chest, buried partially in the mud. Its lid was ajar. He felt a sudden, intense cold, emanating from the chest.